First of all, good morning and thank you for having me here. It's a little intimidating to talk to a room full of practitioners in the HR domain because I'm not one. But I have been a beneficiary of working with really good HR people over time. And as a business leader, I don't believe that it absolves people like me from the need to actually understand talent management and talent growth within the organization, because we are a people business. Most of us are a people business. So getting into this, the previous panel, I'm glad I got here in time for it because they actually verified and validated a lot of things I'm going to talk about now. So let's get into the details of what we talk about. Looking back in history, I'm a big fan of looking back and saying, okay, sometimes we believe that we live in a very unique world and everything is happening now. But sometimes when you look back, of course, this is fictional, from The Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. But when I read this passage, when I went back and looked at it, it actually resonated with me. Because if you look at the narrative around us, it seems like it's the best of times, it's also the worst of times. Things are happening around us which are happening much faster at a pace that we are not able to make sense out of. And that's the reality. But you would think that it's only happening now, but it seems like it happened during the Industrial Revolution as well. I think there was a reference to Industrial Revolution earlier. So I think there's an element of constancy if you look back in history of when world goes through many changes and continuous changes. And the question is, how do you make sense out of it? And I know I'm cognizant of the fact that I'm speaking to the people here who manage the HR functions and organizations, etc. But I speak to you today as a business leader and talk about the fact that, and also a product and technology person, I have about almost 40 years of experience in building and maturing technologies over time. But I can tell you as a technologist, the technology is not the issue. The question is, how do you make use of it? How do you actually bring it forward for the betterment of society? And how do you, technology doesn't know whether its ill effects and its benefits. It's all a question of how do you actually make use of it? How do you understand it? How do you understand its both pros and cons and make sense out of it over time? There's a lot of narrative going on about jobs going away. But if you look at some of the data, and there's a lot of data out there, but I just picked this one from Goldman Sachs that talks about which jobs are probably more prone with AI for disruption. And there was a recent quote from Sam Altman of OpenAI about, he made an interesting observation. He said hands on keyboards are likely to get disrupted faster than hands without keyboards. And what he meant by that was anything that was digital, we've over the last couple of decades, there's been a huge push to digitize, which meant a lot of jobs moved from physical domain into digital domain. And the point that he is making about AI is the fact that those jobs, those very same jobs that everybody felt digital was going to be the answer, is now going to come back and say, oh, you know what, that's exactly the job that's going to get disrupted again. And this is accelerating. I mean, this, the strange part of how things are progressing right now is every day is a new day, every hour is a new hour. The progression on usage, the technology evolution is one side to it, but the usage of this technology is also finding new ways of doing things, whether we talk about, traditional AI or, as what they're calling machine learning nowadays, to generative AI, agentic AI, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of new terminologies being created on a daily basis. What is its impact? At the end of the day, it's about this. It's about, it's strange that we are actually getting squeezed on both ends. If you look at what's happening in the market, and you are all practitioners and you probably can verify this for me, when you think about young people who are graduating, the jobs are going away. Computer science was the degree to get a few years ago. Not that far long ago, 3-4 years ago. The children who are graduating today who joined computer science 4 years ago thinking it was the domain, which was the answer to all of their problems, and parents who, went out of their way, in many cases from lower socioeconomic segments, who have mortgaged their future in order to make their children learn, are waking up to this reality. I met a young person over the weekend, and she is from a tier 3 college in Karnataka, and she was telling me in her graduating class of electronics and communication, not computer science, only 10 of them got jobs out of a class of 70. And she was saying in computer science it's even worse. Now that's a reality. I mean, it's not just in India, by the way. I mean, this is worldwide. I have friends whose children have graduated from, the top 10 universities in the US in computer science who are struggling to find jobs. So on one side, we are squeezing the entry point. And on the other hand, the middle of the pyramid is also getting squeezed. Organizations are, the most, and I'm sorry to take a very negative tone on this, but I think it's reality. Most organizations are reducing, and I would love to get this validated in this room, the middle management. The whole narrative of orchestrators versus doers. This is McKinsey terminology, and I think it's permeated in the ecosystem. Most organizations now want more doers in the system and not orchestrators. Now the problem with that is most people in the middle of the pyramid, a lot of their skills have shifted. They've gone from doing work to actually, managing work. And I think that's a problem. And if you look at this kind of data, the speed at which this is actually coming down the pipe, it brings up the question when we talk about people development. When we talk about filling the entry pipeline so that we actually are building experiences in the organizations over time. Where is all that going to come from? Are we kind of creating an airlock in organizations by squeezing the entry point, letting go of people who are experienced, and then trying to figure out how this will work? And the big bet seems to be two kinds. The shovel sellers, right? I would call the hyperscalers as the people who are providing the tools. They are taking the approach, and there's, over the last couple of, week or so, there's been a lot of material being generated around this, is the fact that they are mortgaging the people, jobs, and using that money and shifting it to building data centers. Because the demand is so high. Their customers are coming and saying, we don't know how, we want to use AI, you have to provide it. They can't build data centers fast enough. It's not, you can't turn on a data center that you would turn on a server. You have to build these physical spaces. You've got to get power, you've got to get cooling, you've got to, find the places to do this. So that's one side. The other side is organizations saying, I need to prepare for this wave that's coming at me. How do I do this? Are the people I have the right people to take me through this journey, right? So there's a lot of narrative, and the reason I bring it up with all of you is you're going to be in the middle of that discussion, because who do I turn to when I want answers? I'll speak to my HR business partner and say, hey, what should we do? What's our strategy? How do I fill the entry ranks? Do I even go for college recruitment? What should I do? How do I fund this? What should I do with our middle management? We have a lot of people in our, in our pyramid, a traditional pyramid structure. That pyramid structure is likely to get blown up. What do we do? How do we look at reskilling? Do we do broad reskilling? Do we do depth reskilling? When we talk to our folks, when they tell us, listen, you can give me Copilot, right? Microsoft Copilot or whatever, the tools at AI, I don't know how to use this. So guess what? I'll just fall back on what I know and the way I do things. So how do you bring that forward? So there is this is a very complex structure. So going back to that quote from Tale of Two Cities, it's a very complex environment we live in, and we are trying to find simplistic answers which just don't exist. So I'm not saying we should get caught up in the analysis paralysis, but all of us have to experiment our way there. Now, at the same time, one of my experiences as a technologist in building products, both in the consumer domain and in the enterprise domain, has been that what they call consumerization of the enterprise, which means me or you or anybody else who experiences technology as a consumer, as a private, individual consumer, will expect those things to be available to me when I go back to work. It's very dissonant when I am used to a set of experiences that I can pull out on my phone, and then I walk into an enterprise and the tools that I'm used to, that people give me, the company has subscribed to, are very different. So the point, what I was interesting about this slide was HBR looked at how people are starting to use AI. And this is between 24 and 25, mind you. And I would suggest that, I don't know when in 25 this was done. If it was done in the first half of 25 to second half of 25 itself, things could have changed. But one of the things you notice here is the way things are changing. People are starting to use it for personal wellness. They're using it for personal learning. They're starting to use it for various other things. This morning I saw, when I was coming in the car, one of the advantages of being in Bangalore, you can catch up on a lot of your reading, and when you're commuting. I saw a quote from somebody, or a post from somebody on X, that basically said they're using ChatGPT, or not ChatGPT, Perplexity as a personal coach for mindfulness. And what that meant was opening up the chat mode, the voice mode, and saying, okay, guide me through guided meditation. And it does it for you. Now, if you think about how people are using personal technologies, and then you come back into the workforce, and you come into the office, you're commuting to work, and you walk into the office, and now suddenly you're asked to go find all the information you need in old SharePoint sites, it is going to be a problem. So the thing to think about here is, what's the kind of employee value proposition you want to give people? So what are the changes that are coming up for all of you in the room, right? This is no different than if I am, my head of engineering, my head of product, my head of, finance. They're all going through the same thing, technological disruption. Do more with less. How many of you here have had a reduction in headcount for HR in your organizations? Don't be shy. I know a few people are raising their hands. But that is the reality. If you've not already felt it, you're going to feel it pretty soon. You're going to get less people. You're going to get the thing saying, oh, use AI. How are you using new age tools to reduce the number of people you have? If you're not doing college recruitment anymore, why do you need a college recruiting team? My point is, I'm not advocating go back and start laying people off. That's not my point. My point is, there is a pressure through the organization for doing less with, do more with less. The second is changing business and workforce expectations. I touched upon a little bit about workforce expectations. Personalization of one, now. It's not tomorrow. They want it now. The business expectations are also changing. It's about personalization. Your individual, leaders within the organization will come back and say, hey, for my organization, my function, I need this type of individualized training, whatever it is, recruitment, people development, and efficiency gains that I'm looking for. And how are we going to make that happen? Globalization and remote work. While there's a lot of narrative on back to office and return to office and so on and so forth, the reality is we are a global organization. Most of us in this room probably are MNCs. And even if you're not an MNC, and if you're anchored in a geography, remote work is the reality. It will happen. I mean, while you can get people back into the office for 5 days and they'll come back grudgingly, there is nothing to show that their efficiency is any higher than when they come to office 3 days a week. In fact, in a place like Bangalore and other big cities, the commute time takes so much energy out of people that I can't imagine how efficient they are in the office just because you want them there. And then this will become a whole bunch of other things that will come up. And then focus on diversity and inclusion. The whole DEI narrative, especially driven in the US, has fallen by the wayside. But we can't forget that. Everybody is unique. When you talk about personalization, we are talking about uniqueness. And then we are talking about inclusion. How are we actually going to engage the organization in the journey that we want? You can't make changes as a business leader, I'll tell you, I can't make changes to the organization sitting at the top of the pyramid. It just doesn't work. You need to be able to recruit people. You need to be able to build a purpose for them. You need to be able to co-opt them into the journey that you want over time. Okay, so I'll speed up a little bit. Gartner hype cycle, there was a reference in the previous panel that was happening about tools. Gartner publishes the hype cycle. Some of you may be familiar with it. They do it across domains. And the HR domain is no different. And when you think about, where the emphasis is in terms of some of the tools that are coming up, you talk about generative AI in HR and so on and so forth. But as you think about over the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a lot happening in the agentic space. I mean, you're going to get things which are, the other reality as an HR professional you have to deal with it is, at some point you're going to have a mixture of human beings and agents that you need to make sense of. There was a little bit kind of an amusing thing that happened in China. A bunch of robots at the exhibition got together and negotiated with each other and said that their labor laws or their personal, they were being violated in terms of work hours and stuff like that, and got together and kind of rolled out of the exhibition floor. This was reality. You can look it up, in the news. What is happening here is the fact that AI is not a deterministic system. When you shift from deterministic systems, where you know what 1 plus 1 is equal to 2, to a probabilistic system, where the data and its inference can be very different. Think about it. You can go to ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever your favorite LLM is. The same query today and in the morning and in the afternoon may actually deliver different answers. Because it is not a deterministic system. The input-output is not guaranteed. And we talk about hallucination. It's no different than humans hallucinating. I may have thought that I heard something and I may repeat it, when maybe I didn't. So the need for the hour is to understand that you're moving from a deterministic world or semi-deterministic world, I won't say it was all deterministic, to a completely non-deterministic world, a probabilistic world, where data, correlation, inferencing delivers different answers based on what you do. And so one of the things that, when you think about what is driving HR transformation is the fact that, automation, we talked about that earlier, is increasing efficiency. But efficiency is not the only thing to focus on. There's a set of activities around it that we need to think about, workflow changes and so on and so forth, that will have a very different set of outcomes. Going back to this probabilistic nature, we can't even predict what this is potentially going to look like. We can ask, we can try to understand, but we have to be ready and flexible to the point that it may not be deterministic. Talked about recruiting, and I won't repeat everything that I talked about earlier. And here are some use cases that are getting more prominence. Recruiting is definitely one. Continuous performance management, personalized learning and development, predictive talent analytics. I think there's a lot of references to it in the previous panel. Employee well-being. I think in a world where everybody is anxious, how do we think about settling people down? How do we give them the tools and sentiment analysis and understanding, and then be able to tailor to it? And then flexible and hybrid work environment. So I think talent management, overall talent management is starting to change. Now here's my set of recommendations for people. First of all, responsible AI. Harvard did a study with ChatGPT. They looked at the cultural nuances of ChatGPT with respect to about 65 different countries around the world. And what they discovered, it's not surprising, they found that ChatGPT's, the psychological profile of ChatGPT was closer to the Western countries. Why? Because that's the data it's actually, it's trained on. So it's not surprising that the psychological profile. So think about it from the aspect of when we start to apply our cultural lenses on top of this, our local lenses in terms of how people are, we can't have one solution that fits all. But if we blindly trust these tools, forget about hallucination for a second. The psychological profile being different will take us in a very different direction and may not yield the right type of outcomes that we are looking for. And things like upskilling your HR teams. You need to get comfortable with these technologies. And that's not going to happen by accident. It's not somebody else's job. It's each one of the leaders in this room to go back and say, okay, how are we helping our own teams learn? Data for personalization. I think data is most fragmented thing that I talked about in the previous in the panel as well. And then championing DEI through AI. What does that even mean? Monitoring for bias, using the data for foster outreach and foster inclusion. Turn it around and make it a much more positive effect. And balance tech and touch. I think empathy is still the name of the game. How do we build an empathetic organization? Continue to build an empathetic organization in the age of AI. And let me just finish up. I know my time's up. AI infusion in HR, we all have to be living under a rock. It's not just HR. You can substitute HR with any other function in the organization. It's not an if. It's how fast, how soon, and with what level of specificity and quality are we ready for it. Whether we're ready for it or not, it's coming at us. Prepare for AI with a positive mindset. I started off this presentation with a little bit of negativity, but you have to take a positive approach to this because we know it's coming. The question is how are we getting ourselves ready for it? Whether we use it, whether we get comfortable with it, we start to experiment with it, we start to work with others in the organization, and the only way to do this is actually if your functional role is one part to this, you're a member of the organization at the end of the day. How do you partner with other functions within the organization to actually make sense out of this. Then be cognizant of bias, and I keep coming back to this fact that because I think if, as you know, in our organizations, whether it is a human being who's a worker or it's going to be an agent in the future, the bias is the thing that which we have to really guard against and work actively to use and understand what the elements of ethical AI and be able to do this. At the end of the day, take advantage of it as a human and, of course, powered by AI. Thank you.